Welcome to the Transformational Podcast. We are glad you are joining us today, wherever your day has you. Today's going to be a little bit different. Chris and I talked about this in one of our previous podcasts that we're going to have on a guest or two as we go forward. We want to have folks be able to come in and talk about their transformational faith. Today, Chris, I had the opportunity to speak to a missionary from the Philippines, a guy named Billy Morgan. Great story of faith, and a great story of faith on how God took him through the kind of the crawl, walk, run phase. A lot of what we're talking about, just being obedient to that next step on what God's calling him to do. And Chris, he came from a Christian family. He did school to become an accountant. He knew he was called into missionary, didn't really know where, but he was obedient to the next step that God was calling him to. So I'm really excited to, for folks to listen in today. I'm honestly excited to listen to it again. Had a great conversation with him, and my prayer is as you're listening to that, you'd have an opportunity to you just hear from other people's perspective, especially people who've gone into now full-time ministry. Because as we discussed, Chris, and you know what I'm talking about when I say this, full-time ministry is actually where we're at. It's not in the Philippines.
It's wherever God has you. That's your ministry, and that's your full-time ministry. So
yeah, I mean, that's what we're going to be listening.
There's vocational ministry, but there's full-time ministry is all followers of Jesus. So
so you weren't able to join us, so you won't see Chris in that coming up. But this is kind of us talking about what's coming up.
It's probably for the best. It's probably for the best. Because it just would have made it longer. So I'm glad I actually get to sit back and just listen to the conversation this time. I can't wait.
All right. Well, we are going to go ahead and start that right now. Hey, welcome to the Transformational Podcast. We are so glad you're joining us today. Obviously, Chris isn't with me. This is Billy Morgan. If you're watching on YouTube, if not, if you're listening, Billy Morgan is with me today. And you're probably like, okay, well, who is that? And well, I'm glad you asked, because we're going to do an entire podcast about that. But Billy, I heard him speak at our church this week. Mm-hmm. He's a missionary back from the Philippines. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself when I heard him speak, I was like, I really want to do a podcast with him. And Chris and I have been talking, as you heard on our last podcast, we've been talking about having some guests on and honestly telling their stories of faith and really teaching us their transformational stories of faith. And so when I called Chris and I said, hey, Chris, I got a guy I really want to have a podcast with. My brother, Chris, was just like, at the same time, he's like, hey, I was thinking the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so I'm excited to do the podcast. And, obviously it's your first podcast. Yeah.
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 Well, no.
No,
I've
really?
done before. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So
once in the Philippines.
Okay. So hopefully not as nervous as one would be on their first time, but Philippines missionary, and came to our church and spoke this last Sunday, told us a little bit about, honestly, you spoke from God's word, talked about what Paul had prayed for believers, which I enjoyed. Right. I wrote that down.
Okay.
And then I did write it down. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Dude, look at that.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Notes, that's good.
I took some notes.
Yeah.
And then you told us a little bit about your work there. Mm-hmm. And so where I want to start today, if it's okay.
Sure.
So we don't jump right to the end. I want to start a little bit about kind of who are you? Who's Billy? Where did you grow up? Did you grow up in a Christian family, non-Christian family? What did that look like for you? What was your early life like?
Okay, sure. Well, I grew up in Fairhope, Alabama, and my dad served as an assistant pastor and later on as a pastor. So I kind of grew up in a Christian family.
Okay.
And my mom's a believer. And so we had a lot of doing church type stuff. And so my testimony, I guess, is somewhat not super exciting, but yet God still works in good families and families that are broken.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful for my upbringing. But
Chris and I were talking about this week because Chris and I have a similar.
That's right. Your dad is a pastor.
He was a itinerant pastor, so he preached a little bit.
Okay. So very much involved in the church.
Yeah, and so we were joking last week. We were like, it didn't feel like we had a I got saved from something story, right?
Yeah, not like a drug addict and just like God changed my life. Right.
We
behind
joked
that either.
about or talked about how sometimes it's not what he saved us from, it's what he's done since, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
so you can
right.
kind of
Yeah,
see
that's
that.
right.
So anyway, a Christian family.
Yeah, and so I started with youth group and being involved a little bit, and it wasn't until college when I got really involved in mission. So I went to
Okay.
a Southern Baptist University, University of Mobile, and
Okay.
we did mission trips, and so I got to go to Israel, and
Really?
yeah, that
On a
was my
mission
first.
trip?
Yeah,
What'd you do? How old were you when you did that
I
one?
was 19.
Okay. And it was a
So
college trip?
yeah, it was a college
Hmm.
trip, and so I had to raise like $2,000. It was a lot of money back then, in 1997 for
Not so much anymore. This cup of
yeah,
coffee is almost a
that's
grand.
very little money actually.
Yeah.
So half the trip was working. I poured cement and we cleaned out
Okay.
brush and cut down branches. We were making a prayer garden for the Messianic Jewish people
All
there.
right.
We worked at a Baptist mission. So
Okay.
5 days was hard labor and 5 days was touring.
That's not bad. Well, for those who don't know, Messianic Jew
Is
is.
a Jewish by blood, but comes to faith in Christ.
Yeah.
So it was a church there. So I think it really exposed me to mission. So Israel, I know people talk about Israel, how great it is, and it's a really nice country.
Yeah.
But what really hit me was just talking to the missionaries and hearing
Okay.
their stories and telling, just getting exposed to ministry.
Did they have full-time missionaries at that
Yeah, they
point?
do.
And
Yeah,
you were doing a short term.
it was just a 2 week mission trip.
Okay.
So, I mean, for me, that was the biggest thing was not necessarily touring, which was nice, but it was just
Yeah.
more on just talking to missionaries.
Yeah, I did some mission like short-term mission trip early on,
Uh-huh.
especially high school time frame. And one of the things I found is while there was some, you did have a little. Well, I went to deep Mexico, so the fun was a little bit not Israel-like,
Yeah,
but the time spent with the full-time missionaries was really meaningful
right.
because you got to see how folks work, which is why we're actually chatting with you
Yeah,
today,
that's
because I
right.
want to talk a little bit about that.
Right.
At that time, when you were doing the missions work, were you at that point going, I think I want to be a full-time missionary, or were you just I'm going to say dabbling? Were you dabbling? Like, what was
Yeah,
your life plan at that point at
right.
19?
Well, it was actually I was studying for accountancy, and
To be
so
an accountant?
yeah,
All
and
right.
and actually I thought about in college to switch my major to theology. It
Okay.
was my dad who said, as a pastor, he said, "No, you should continue in accountancy and go ahead and go all the way through," because he knows how small you might be in a smaller church and you need to tent make. The expression
Yeah.
tent make meaning have another job
Yeah.
and do ministry. And so he encouraged me, do your accounting first and then do your ministry training afterwards after
All
you
right.
graduate. That's exactly what I did.
Did
So
you,
I'm very
were you
thankful.
still planning to be in other words, be in the mission field, or were you thinking you were going to go into ministry and the calling was broad at that
Yeah,
point?
very broad. Yeah. So I didn't know what I wanted to do because I was just mainly doing ministry on the side,
Mm-hmm.
just do that. So, and just be very much involved in ministry, but
Okay.
yet focus on accounting. I really didn't know for sure, but I knew I needed to finish my degree.
Yeah.
And so after that, when Israel, I went to Mexico, another building step,
Yep.
and that was more hands-on missions.
Okay.
So the Israel trip, I'm not. If anybody who knows who I am, I'm not really good with manual labor.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, I'm
if
not
you,
a
if
manual
you were,
labor kind of guy.
You said you did concrete work, and I was
cement,
curious.
pouring cement, and if you know who I am, that's not my thing.
That was out of your
It was really
comfort
hard.
zone.
Yeah, so definitely, I'm more of a that's
Yeah.
not. But so the mission trip to Mexico was better because we were teaching kids. So that
Okay.
was more hands-on. In Israel, it was harder because of the evangelism restrictions and things. So that was more
Yeah.
supporting role. But for Mexico, we were, teaching kids the gospel out of the wordless book, black as sin, red as blood.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and then we had a translator. So that was
I was
definitely
gonna
more
ask that,
hands-on.
yeah.
Definitely hands-on mission there.
Okay. How long was that one? Was that another
Just a
short
week.
term?
Yeah, another short term,
Do you
about a
think
week
there's
and a half.
value in the short-term missions trips? Like, what do you see the value? Because I've done several, and I've
Yeah.
heard some. I want to say debate's not the right word, but some
Yeah.
discussions. on
The
that.
discussion.
Do you
So
think the short terms are valuable?
yes and no. So I think I'd say majority yes.
Okay.
Because some would make the argument like, you know what, you could support a village pastor
Mm-hmm.
for a year on what it costs to send
To get
one
somebody
short-term
there.
missionary. That's one side, resources. But at the other side, I would never trade those experiences in my life.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I mean, yeah. So I spent $3,000, $2,000 for the Israel, $1,000
Yeah.
for Mexico, and I loved it, you
Yeah.
know, and I think God used it as a building steps or building blocks in my life to, you know, so
Yeah.
I don't want to,
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but
yeah, yeah. So it's like, you
when
know,
you were doing your missions work in the Philippines, did you have short-term missions type folks come visit, or was that?
yeah, we had we had three different occasions. We had three separate teams from
Did
Faith
you find
Bible.
that super helpful? Or
Yeah,
I
a
mean,
little
obviously
bit.
you don't want to
Actually,
besmirch
so
folks, or but
yeah, so basically, what we did was, since I train pastors,
yeah,
I don't expect, you know, 17-year-olds to train pastors.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so
the
that's
thing,
not going to
right?
be the thing. But what we did was we've made connections and partnerships with these pastors and their churches.
Okay,
So we visited the churches that we like kind of have partnerships
okay,
with, and we did like school ministry.
yeah,
And I think it was pretty beneficial. Like there was one church in the mountains, it was 2 hours. It was in a
yeah,
remote mountain village, and we took the Faith Bible team,
yeah,
and they were very appreciative
yeah.
of them coming.
Well, so I
So
think
yeah, I think it's yeah,
yeah, I think it's
yeah,
funny. I think the piece of that is that I found value in it because I've
hmm
done several short-term missions here and there. Is it's I always I pray that it's beneficial to the folks who are on the receiving end, right?
hmm
But I do see how God works in the lives of those who
mm,
don't necessarily can't jump full into missions work,
right,
but God calls them to help in some way, and that may be a way that they help. And I see him working. I know he's worked in my life
right,
specifically and during several of the mission trips
hmm
where he's done some pretty deep work, getting them out of the the hustle and bustle of
right,
regular life and getting yourself in almost a fully devoted session or
right,
situation. I think we see that sometimes actually in the New Testament where
hmm
folks get sent out and then come back,
yeah,
kind of thing, where they're not
right,
full
right.
time. So I don't want to jump far ahead. So you did the Mexico trip. You studied to be an accountant, and you
Right.
decided, and you had a broad call to ministry. How did you get narrowed down
Narrow
to
it down.
missions?
Right. Well,
And then we'll further narrow down to how did you
sure.
end up in the Philippines?
So then my other ministry that I did a little bit, where I was introduced to Filipino people.
Okay.
We live in a coastal town,
Okay.
Mobile, Alabama. So there was a group that had ministered to seafarers or sailors
Okay.
coming off the boats and you know, cruise ships and things. And so I met a lot of Filipino people that way, just on a casual basis.
Mm-hmm.
They would take them to Walmart and do, you know, this church ministry or ministry, kind of like a parachurch ministry. And so like what happened was I got introduced to international missions a little bit more, you know,
Okay.
and working with them. We did inner city missions. That wasn't really my thing, but I enjoyed seeing it and being
Mm-hmm.
helpful.
Were you
And
working at the time, or were you doing missions?
I
In
was
other words, were
mainly
you
just
doing
going to
like a?
college, and I was doing part time work in accounting.
Okay. Okay.
So I had a job, but so it's I think it's funny. So like I prayed a prayer. So like I was graduating in 2002,
Okay.
and about a year before that, I said, Lord, I think I want to go on a mission trip. You know, before I get settled into the
Mm-hmm.
workforce. You know, it's hard to take off, especially when you're new to a job. You know, so I was like, well, maybe the Lord will lead me to a trip. You know, do a mission trip before I get a job
Okay.
and graduate college. Do a mission trip. Lord, wherever do you want me to go? I'll be open to wherever.
Yeah.
The next day, God has an answer to that prayer.
What did that look like?
That was Teresa's. My wife is from the Philippines, by the way. So
Okay.
her
Were y'all
pastor.
married at the time?
No, we didn't know each
Okay.
other.
Didn't
Her
know each other.
pastor shows up at her church, and I don't
Hmm.
know if he was already. Maybe he was already. I think he was already scheduled.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah,
You
it was
asked,
already.
and the
Yeah,
Lord
I want to say it was the
answered.
next day or the next week.
Yeah.
It was really soon, and then listening to their mission report, I said, I think I would like to go visit them.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
It
just
was
to
kind of almost like a heart feeling,
yeah, like I
where
could do
God
something
drew
like
you in that
that, right?
direction.
Because
Yeah.
they do. You know, I was 22 at the
Yeah.
time, 22. And I said, I think I could do kids ministry, youth ministry, camp
Yeah.
ministry. They have all that. And so the missionary lady, she's the wife of the missionary, she invites me to go to their ministry.
Okay.
We would like to have you visit. I think that's an answered prayer.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So,
Chris and I talk about that all the time.
all right.
Now, the fact that because that's part of what we try to help people along in their just their faith journey is okay. So how do you hear God? What does that sound like? And we talk
Right.
about that all the time, right? Because everybody's like, I'm trying to see where God wants me to go,
Mm-hmm.
and they may not be asking the right question. I think one of the question you asked, which I think is the right question, is you said, Lord, I think I want to go on a mission trip, and you didn't say, and this is where I want to go. You said
Yeah.
I would be open to wherever.
Right. Right.
And so it's a open-handed question of God, I'm willing to follow you, face first in anything you're calling me to be,
That's right.
calling me to do.
Right.
And I think that's the question. And honestly, I think that's the question that got you the response as fast as it did. Otherwise, if you had said, hey, I want to do this, I want to go to a mission trip and I want it to go over here, and you had pre-described, I think God would have probably,
I didn't say, God, I want to go to Afghanistan or North Korea.
He may have made you wait a little longer.
Yeah,
on a response, right?
You got to wait for the open door. So we look for open doors to see where God directs the circumstances.
And then you were willing to follow as soon as God, it looked like that was it.
Right.
You probably felt, I'm going to say 90% certain in your heart that that's where God was calling you, and you didn't like go back and try to get a reconfirmation, right? You just hey, this is it. I'm going to follow, right?
Well, sort of. So
yeah, all right.
A little bit. Funny story. They said I could bring a team.
Okay.
So I invited like 8 people.
Okay.
College students, same age as me. And they 8 people expressed interest
in the Philippines.
Yeah, to go with me. Go with me. So I was going to be the team leader.
Okay.
Well, when it was all said and done, it was just me. They all backed out. And it was around New Year's Eve, and the trip's supposed to be in May. So I got 5 months.
Yeah.
It's, starting to get time to book tickets and everything. So everybody's backing out. I mean, it wasn't like a serious interest, but So I was like, And so it was a friend of mine, older guy. Maybe he had to be 25 years older than me. He said, I say Matt. His name was Matt. I said, do you think I should go? I mean, everybody's backed out. And he said, you know what, Billy? I think you're spiritually mature enough to handle it to go by yourself. And he said, I think you can handle it. You maybe that's what the Lord wants you to do. You just go by yourself.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. So that was kind of
isn't that a crazy,
I'm glad he didn't say no, right?
But isn't that a crazy one step in the right direction? I think if you had gone with a team, do you think you would have stepped into missions by yourself?
I don't know, because I was kind of forced to be more involved with the people. Because I didn't really have anybody to talk to, because with mission trips, they can be sometimes cliquish, where you kind of just do your own thing, and especially with young people a little bit. So you got to get out your side of your comfort zone.
It's kind of funny how God works that stuff out sometimes.
Yeah. So mission trips can really, people that you go with could be a little effective on what happens. Effective. Yeah, how effective you are, and then also your attitude. And if everybody has a bad attitude, that's not good.
No,
so it's, but anyway, so that really made a big difference, I think.
So off that trip, did you come back going, hey, this is what I want to do full time? What was the turning point from, okay, I'm dabbling in missions, thinking I'm going to do some accounting and some ministry work too. Hey, I think God's called me to full-time missions. What did that?
So it's like baby steps. So it's like you go from crawling to walking to running. So, after the 3 weeks, it was a 3-week trip. I helped out at the camp. I loved it there, and I wanted to go there, and but I wasn't ready to say I'm going to live here the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But basically, I talked to the missionary family that originally invited me. I said, I think I could do a year here.
Okay.
Yeah, I like to do a year, 8 months. 8 months, 8 to 9 months, almost a year.
Yeah.
Is that okay? And I said, we would love to have you. We want you to be a teacher at our Bible school, and teach some theological classes. And basically, you could help teach chapel. They have a Christian school. And I found out they have, I could be a coach. I can coach running. They needed some accounting help for their budgeting and things. So for their accounting, so I could do that. I like jack of all trades, stuff that I really love to do anyway.
It was available.
So I'm like, well, okay, let me go back and get some money together. I'll come back here for almost a year.
Okay.
And that's what I did.
Support?
So basically I got a job. So, and I was living at home. So that I self-supported about halfway of it, half of my expenses, maybe. Another half was some donations. I spoke at a few churches and people helped me out along the way.
Yeah. So which we're called to do.
Yeah. So we got it all together. The Lord took care of it. So the job especially helped. And so I put it all together, and then I was there for 8 months.
Yeah.
Halfway into the trip, I get a little homesick.
Really?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess I get that. Was that your first time away?
Not homesick, like boohoo. I'm gonna go home. You mean. I just got tired of. Okay, so in the Philippines, that people call you Joe, like G.I. Joe.
Okay.
So it was a nickname for servicemen, and for some reason that really annoyed me.
Yeah.
Now it's a great honor if somebody were to call me Joe.
Yeah.
but I thought it was kind of disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, and maybe some inconveniences.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain things that they don't have, like toilet paper in the bathroom.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
expected for you to bring your own.
Okay.
You've not been to other countries before, and it's just not like the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
Just stuff like that, and
And I've been to a few, so I know what you're talking about. It's not quite home, and
yeah, like air conditioning. They don't have air conditioning in a lot
yeah,
of places, and it's
yeah,
hot and this and that. And so there's just little inconveniences that kind of bother me. So basically, about halfway into the trip, I said, I was going to finish my
yeah.
commitment, but I said, I'm not cut out to be a missionary.
Okay.
These
Hmm.
guys really sacrifice a lot. I'm going to be a U.S. pastor.
Okay.
So I want to be in ministry, but not a
Hmm.
missionary.
That's interesting.
So it's like I was at the right place at the wrong time.
Okay.
And I think I just needed to grow up a little bit.
Okay.
And the year went really good. And I made a lot of
Yeah.
connections with people. And I
Did you
felt like
learn language while you were there?
I did.
Okay.
And so I did learn the language. They speak some English,
Yeah.
but I tried to learn. Mainly, this is kind of a selfish reason. I wanted to fit in a little bit
Okay.
and understand what was going on.
Yeah. I know what people are
But
talking
I
about.
also wanted to use it for the ministry too.
Yeah.
So it was dual purpose, I guess. So yeah, I really wanted to. I felt like that wasn't for me.
Mm-hmm.
The ministry, being a missionary. I'm just going to be a pastor, but I want theological training. So I had to make a choice. Did I go to seminary in the city because I had a Southern Baptist seminary there, or do I
Okay.
go back to home to Alabama? And I chose to go back.
Okay.
And that kind of pushed me and Teresa are already in a relationship. So I kind of pushed forward a relationship. So I was like, well, we had to make some decisions. So we
Yeah.
decided to go, and I really wanted to be with her.
Yeah.
So we went to the States and did seminary.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny. Now, did you meet Teresa here or the Philippines?
No, I met her in the Philippines.
Okay. Yeah.
It was her pastor who came to our church. So I
Yeah.
met her on the ministry.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I was chatting with her. So for people who don't know, we had dinner with them last night, and so I was chatting with her, and she's Filipino, dual citizen, right?
Yeah, right.
And
Dual citizen in
so
both countries.
very neat, awesome. And you guys have 3 kids, and the
Mhm.
rest. So when you guys come back, you decide, hey, this isn't for me. Did you end up doing seminary and then deciding, okay, actually, I feel drawn back into it, or
Yeah, so it's really funny. So, like, I guess a year I did seminary, and we have a church seminary, and it's basically our pastor wanted to train other
Mhm.
pastors. So I
Okay.
enrolled there. But my Hebrew teacher, it was not really that good, and it really overwhelmed me. And around that time, I'm like, this is too much for me. And it wasn't. I still wanted to be in ministry, but not like I don't think I'm going to be a pastor.
Yeah.
So I felt like this is not what I need to be, and I'm not going to do it. And so it's like I had a talk with our pastor, and I said, I think I'm just going to be an accountant and just do ministry on the side.
Okay,
And he said,
so
he
a
said
little
that's
bit like
fine.
a tent maker pastor, right?
Yeah, well, not even a pastor.
Or
I was
like
like, I
like a
just want to be a
filler.
servant of God and do
Okay.
that. So
Yeah.
it's funny because he said, well, we're going to make you our official Philippine ministry guy.
Okay.
And so we dedicated ourselves to do short-term missions. So we would lead trips back to the Philippines. So we went back 2005, 2006. Every year we'd go back to the Philippines.
Okay.
And I decided I'm not going to be a missionary or a pastor. But every time I went back to the Philippines, God was
He
leading
was
me.
still taking you there. You made me
Yeah.
think of a verse. That's what I was looking
Okay.
up. For those who are watching, Proverbs 16,
Mm.
9. I had to get a little help. I can't
Okay.
claim that I knew this, but I knew the verse. So I just couldn't
Proverbs
find the
16:9.
reference. And so it makes me think of this one, Proverbs 69. It says, in his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And so it sounds to me, you said crawl, walk, run, and that really resonated with me. And hopefully it resonates with folks who are listening. A lot of times we think when God calls us, like he's calling us into the run.
Right.
And I personally believe sometimes God's calling us into the crawl.
Yes.
And then he's calling us into the walk.
All right.
And then he's calling us in the run. And we need to be open to that idea that we can plan our steps, but God's going to direct our course.
That's right.
And I think that's what I see in your life, if I'm hopefully not speaking out of turn.
No, not at all.
That he kind of like was like, hey, like you said, what did you say? You said I had to mature, some growing up to do.
Yeah. And it wasn't the right timing.
Yeah, timing
Right.
as well, right?
Right.
So if somebody's looking at their own life and they're like, hey, And I don't know how many people ever consider going into missions or
Mm-hmm.
even doing, short-term mission work. Um, how would you encourage them if they're even considering it? What would be your thing? And we'll jump into like what the mission field looks like. But if they're in that moment and they're thinking like you were,
Yeah.
I'm not cut out for this, or maybe I was just meant to be a tent maker and
Right. Right.
whatever, but they still feel that kind of that persistent
Right.
draw that
Right.
like, hey, I'm kind of going, which based on what you went through, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
everybody's experience is different. Based on what you went through, what would your encouragement be to them? What would you kind of guide them?
Well, I think the main thing is prayer and get yourself ready spiritually. I know we're not ever going to be ready. We're mature,
Mm-hmm.
but we want to make sure we're walking with the Lord and reading His Word, praying. That
Yeah.
spiritual discipline
Mm-hmm.
that we want to do, and then as the Lord leads, take little trips. Start with a local. It doesn't have to be international. Just do
Yeah.
something local. Even
Actually, we
like our
just did
group
one. Yeah.
from Kentucky.
Yeah.
Just so in missions is not necessarily everybody has to train pastors.
Mm-hmm.
It could be doing the back scenes type thing where in the background
Mm-hmm.
servanthood of some sort. It could be the people pouring the cement. Whatever.
Absolutely.
But it could be whatever. So doing the small steps.
It is kind of funny if you think
Right.
about it. Your crawl was pouring cement, right? So you don't
Right.
have to really interact.
Yeah.
Your
That was
walk,
more sitting up and learning how to sit up as a
right,
crawl.
right.
Yeah.
Your walk was like now I have to kind of have interaction with children,
Right.
and then your still walk was going on your own
Right.
and doing basically your own. Which turned
Right.
into 8 months. Which, by the way, that to me is hilarious
Yeah.
because I couldn't imagine being. I've done a few short-term missions. I've never been out there and gone. I think I want to do 8 more months of this.
Right. Right. Right.
So pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Let's transition a little bit. What does your missions work look now? You're out there for how long have you been in Philippines?
Okay. So
Start there.
as basically 2007.
As a full-time mission.
Oh, full time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in 2007, about 2 years before we go, our pastor preached a sermon about we really need people to stay in the mission field, not just go.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like maybe a little bit slightly convicted, I guess, or
Okay.
something. Yeah, and it doesn't mean everybody needs to go. I mean,
Yeah.
to stay in the mission
Well,
field.
the Lord was working in your heart.
Maybe,
right? Yeah.
but it seemed like that was time.
Mm-hmm.
That I should start thinking about actually staying longer
Okay.
and maybe even living there.
Okay.
And so,
Were you married at this point?
yes. Oh, I've been married. By that time, I was married 4 years.
Okay.
So, we had a small kid already.
Yeah.
Will, he was my oldest. So it's like, well, what does that look like? Well, I need to go back to seminary and finish.
Okay.
So basically, I started taking steps in my life, in our lives, and of course, me and my wife, I think if you're married, you want to make sure that your spouse is on board.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
So she was very much on board.
Okay.
But so when we decided not to live in the U.S., she was okay with that. But I feel like maybe she feels more used by God being in the mission field,
Mm-hmm.
But she's okay to. So I think contentment, because
Yeah.
we were ready. We wanted to go so bad, but it was in the Great Recession. We were trying to sell our house, and
the housing market bubble.
yeah, so it was
all
really
that other
hard.
stuff,
So our
yeah.
house was on the market for 2 years. So it was really
Man,
long. We didn't, but it was just like, well, we got to wait.
Yeah.
And so I think contentment is, and God used us, and we were making connections with Filipino people living in Alabama.
Okay.
So we had Bible studies with them. And
So you're still doing missions. You were just doing missions within
locally,
the realm of which you
right.
had already had.
Involved the youth group and our church, and so that was what we were doing. Making connections with people, and we still have connections with those people even now.
That's awesome.
So we just visited them 2 weeks ago in Oklahoma. So so I think the main thing is that you take small steps and see where the Lord is leading you.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a good idea.
You're not saying anything they haven't heard. All our friends,
Yeah.
you've heard this before. You feel the leading of the Lord. You take a step, and then you take another step, and you see where
Right.
God. He will direct your path. You don't
That's
have to worry
right,
about
right.
that.
So Romans 8:28, we know that God works all things together for good.
Yeah.
So I think He's directing our paths. He's sovereign in the details of our lives, and I think that's what we want to remember as believers.
So so you went full-time ministry, and I know you're back on a furlough now.
Mm-hmm.
This is your second furlough? You said? Third furlough?
Yeah.
What is that? So help folks who don't understand what a full-time mission looks like. So you're there how much time, and then you do a furlough.
Yeah.
And then we'll talk a little bit about what is I'd like to get into maybe some high level, like if somebody's thinking about missions or being a missionary, we'll do a thumbnail sketch of what the day in the
Okay.
life of is, maybe.
Sure.
I know you personally, part of your missions is training pastors.
Right.
So it may not be exactly like that for
Right.
everybody.
Right.
And then what is the furlough? What's that look like? And why a furlough? Why even have a furlough? I think
Okay.
that's important to understand.
Right. Right.
And so let's do it from what's the day in the life? And then
Okay.
we'll talk about the furlough.
The day in the life. All right. Well, I guess just like everybody else, if you have kids, you got to go to school.
Okay.
And they go to a Christian school about 45 minutes away. It's kind of far. So getting them ready, and then we drive. Normally, I take them to school, and then anyway, so that's pretty much normal, like everyone else.
You have
And
normal life because you have normal family and normal stuff,
family.
and you're just plugged into the local. I'm going to call it local economy, but you're plugged into the local area.
So I drive, and then and then Teresa picks them up in the afternoons. So that frees me up to do more other stuff. So I guess like the main thing is, so we teach probably every week at least. Sometimes we have classes multiple times a week, and so our classes are could be a couple hours away. So we're gone like the whole day.
What are you training pastors to do? Because one of the things I think that we, from an American point of view, or from an American standpoint, we really take for granted the amount of biblical saturation that we get, right?
That's right.
And so when you're training pastors, what does that mean? Because when we think of training pastors, we think of one of the theological seminaries or something like that. And I think maybe at a lesser extent, are you doing the same thing, or are you?
We train pastors. So I guess about 12 years ago, I wrote a lot of my own material, and I was able to use sources from different, like our biggest class is Bible interpretation. We focus on that. So because as a pastor or a leader, you want to make sure you're properly interpreting the Word of God.
Yeah.
So we
use the big words like does exegetical and hermeneutics, does that translate into Philippines?
Or we just use those words. Yeah.
Okay.
Explain it. So
exegesis, for those who don't know, is interpreting the scripture as it was written at that time. Hermeneutics is how does it apply to our life.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry for the folks who don't
know. So we focus on that, and we try to interpret. We try to teach that. So a lot of times my day is reviewing the lessons or making new lessons.
Okay.
So I teach an online class on Tuesdays. So I'm constantly making new lessons, or I'm improving my old lessons.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm teaching, the days that I teach, so if I have to travel, like one of my classes, we have to leave the house at 6 a.m.
Okay.
So get up at 5, leave at 6, and because it takes us 3.5 hours to get there. And then we teach from like 9 to 4, and then we come back the same day.
So I know there's like a range of experiences, and I think that's one of the things I really kind of want to talk about the life of. I think sometimes folks are like, folks on the mission field are either like, I don't know, they really don't know. It's almost like a black hole. They're either slaving away or they're not doing anything. They're on a vacation. And in reality, it looks a lot like
somewhere in between.
Yeah, ministry and somewhere in between. In that you're constantly working to prepare a lesson, constantly working to prepare for whatever you're teaching next. I'm sure you're constantly trying to connect with folks who are in your class, right? Because I'm sure some of those folks they're your people, right?
Yeah, sometimes I'll take them out to lunch or, do things with them.
Yeah.
So
because relationship is actually a lot of the ways that we develop a lot of that ministry, that discipleship. And so I think that's important, partly because I think we in the stateside Christian circles, our sphere of influence is we don't understand that is our mission field. Your mission field happens to be, your sphere of influence happens to be in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Whereas like, my friend who's listening right now, our friends who are listening right now, their sphere of influence might actually be wherever they're working right now.
That's right.
And so, those relationships you're building at work are as important as the work that Billy's does in the Philippines, teaching pastors. And I think that's important. I think we don't make that connection because I think we almost separate the church and work, or church and state, and that's just not a thing.
Yeah,
it should be the same.
And I think God has called us to different things.
Yeah.
And so I use this expression. I don't really like the term secular job.
Yeah.
Because everything you do is for God. Whether you're, you go into this job or that job, or you're a truck driver or whatever.
Yeah,
it's all for God. If you're a Bible teacher, that's for God. That's for the Lord. Do heartily unto the Lord.
Yeah, we talked about this last podcast. Well, it's not the last podcast. It was, for those who are listening, it's in Colossians 3:23.
That's right. I remember that verse.
Right?
Yeah.
And it says, whatever you do, work at it with all your All your hurt.
Well, that's
That was some pretty Southern right there. I'm sure you
Yeah.
understood everything
All
I
your
just
hurt.
said.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Whatever you do, work it out with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for men, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving.
That's right.
And I don't think it matters if you're serving them on the mission field or you're serving them back here at home.
Right.
So yeah, it's just normal life for you, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Now, why do you furlough?
Okay, so I guess
Like, in other words, why do you?
we would love to come home every summer. Yeah, that would be nice. I know people, missionaries in Latin America, and closer to the United States, if they're from the U.S., they go home every summer.
Okay.
And I've seen that for some people, but Philippines is
That's
not
a long trip. How long did it take you to get there?
Normally about 24 hours,
Okay.
but to get to our house my parents' house, it's probably about 34 hours. So that's a long way.
It's a long way.
And it's expensive, with family of 5 people. So we decided that we wanted to do 4 years on the field, 1 year in what we call home assignment.
Okay.
And in other mission organizations are doing that. They're required to. We're not. We just do it because we like to.
Yeah.
And we wanted our kids to be exposed to our family because they have cousins in Alabama and family, friends. And, we want to see our family.
Yeah.
So,
super important.
And we don't want to mess up the school year.
Yeah.
So we might as well just do a year.
So furlough is not, you're not coming back because you're tired of the mission field. You're coming back because there's other heart draws.
And then we try to get involved in the churches that we minister to.
So you don't come back and just do nothing.
No, not at all. Yeah. So it's always got something going on. But I'm thankful.
I mean, I'm being serious.
Yeah,
I'm sort of being tongue in cheek, but you come back. Point being is you're investing your life even at home.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And we try to get involved. And a lot of times I get asked to preach or teach. Okay. I've done Bible studies before and, taught Sunday school for 3 or 4 months at a church. Yeah. So it's really nice.
I love the fact you said that even your wife does like an online Zoom thing. So whether she's in the Philippines, I assume that when she gets back here, she'll see them in person because some of these folks are here. Right. But she'll probably continue to do things like that, right? Because
we'll continue our Zoom Bible study with the people in the Philippines, and then she does a ladies ministry online, and then she's probably going to do some more stuff face to face when we get back to Alabama.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Let's see, we've hit some of the things I want to talk about. But I guess I want to spend the last little bit of our time because I'm looking at our clock. We're well into the end here part of this, which is okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit about your daily habit, your daily routine. What does that look like, right? Because again, part of what we talk about on this podcast a lot of times is that transformational faith, and some of that transformational faith is we talk about the fact that if you don't spend time in the Word, then or you don't spend time with the Lord or things like that, you can't be transformed,
right?
Because you can't have the renewing of your mind,
right?
From the mission field or at home, does it look different in the way you spend time with the Lord, or what's your day?
Sure.
What's your day look like when you do
Well,
stuff?
I'm a morning person, so that helps. And as far as
it does help, right?
I think so.
Because some people aren't morning people, and I get it. I'm okay.
So I get a cup of coffee, and it depends on if the kids go to school or not. Sometimes I do it after I take them to school. Yeah. But I have my balcony time, and so we have a balcony. And I go
out. In the
out,
Philippines?
Yeah, in the Philippines. Awesome. And so I go up to the top floor. I sit out in the sun, wearing a hat,
Yeah.
And I just spend time with the Lord, prayer, and I read.
Do you have a routine, like a habit that you go through?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So I think that's important because one of the things, like an application moment here is routines, especially when it comes to this kind of stuff, habits, spending time with the Lord is actually kind of helpful.
Yeah, it is.
I think it helps us because it helps us stay, focused and honestly continuing to do it. So what's your routine?
Yeah, well, I spend maybe 30 to 35 minutes in prayer, you know, and then
what do you pray for? Because I think that's something we hear people say that a lot of times, and then we go to pray for 30 to 45 minutes and we don't know what, or even 15 minutes and we don't know what to pray for.
So kind of remember the acronym CATS.
Okay. CATS. Let's do it. What is it?
C is confession. You confess your sins. You acknowledge, areas where you stumbled,
I tell you what, because it's cats, the cats have a lot to confess. So
that's right.
It makes sense to me.
A is adoration, praising God for who he is.
I love it.
And which is very similar to ACT. Thanksgiving. So that's kind of similar. Thanksgiving, thanking God for who he is, but thanking God for provisions and physical needs,
for
emotional needs, whatever, everything.
Yeah.
And S is supplication. making your requests known to the Lord.
Okay.
You might have as praying for the
Do you keep
government.
a journal or anything like that, or like a little? Do you
I
write things
should.
down, or what do you do?
I write down when I'm taking notes, in my Bible
Uh-huh.
studies, but not during my prayer
Not your prayer
time.
time.
I probably should. That's probably going
Yeah.
to work on them better. But
Yeah.
I
Whatever.
try to put it all up
No, it's
here.
fine. You go as the Lord leads.
That's right.
Go as the
So
Lord
I
leads.
pray about different things or
Okay.
people, and then I read some.
Okay.
So as a Bible, I'm really in-depth Bible teacher. So I have to remember, I'm looking at the details, the trees, the leaves, when you're
Yeah.
putting the verses together. Sometimes you just need to get back and just read. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I do in my, what I call devotional time, is I do more reading than like heavy study.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other times where I'm doing more heavy study.
That's a good point.
Both are
Yeah.
important. You need
Yeah.
to heavy study, but you need to come back so if I'm in the mornings, I kind of just do more somewhat casual reading, but more in depth too a little bit.
Okay.
Just reading, more so reading and studying a little bit too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then take a few notes if the mood hits you.
Yeah, that's right. But normally I go to my computer for that. So
Okay.
I type everything.
Do you really?
Yes, I type
I
everything.
still write stuff down. I can't help it.
So
And now I have a daily reader that I actually was joking with my brother. I have to write down what day it is, but what day I'm reading, because that doesn't always line up with the same day.
Right.
And so I'll try to reference something. I'll be like, oh, I wrote something great down in my journal. And I'll look at it and I'm like, oh, I don't know, because the daily Bible I have does a little bit of Old Testament, a little bit of New Testament, Proverbs and Psalms. And if I don't know what day it is, I can't find a reference very well. Because sometimes one of the things I love about my daily reader here, and it happened this last week, is something that happens in the Old Testament gets referenced in the New Testament. And so I'll read an Old Testament, where he talks about, Solomon's temple and the completion of the temple. And then in the New Testament, I'll have a description of the temple as it was. Now the old temple, but not the new temple, like the second one. But it's neat to have that connection as you read through and you see that thread pulled through from old to new, and you can kind of see that story. And the Bible's about Jesus, so you see the story of Jesus getting pulled through from 4 to end.
Right.
So you spend a little time in prayer, you spend a little time in reading and devotional, and then that's kind of how you start your day, and you go from there.
Right. It depends on the kids if they are going to school or not.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's after I drop them off.
Yeah.
It just depends on the time. But
are you super rigid, or are you kind of like you let it free flow? In other words, if it's short one day, it's short, and if it's long one day, it's long. Or how do you manage that? Some people have expectations, right? They're like, I'm going to spend an hour, 60 minutes. Right.
I'm a little bit rigid, but not super rigid.
Okay.
And there have been times where we had to get up super duper early.
Yeah.
So I might do it later on in the afternoon or evening. And so it just doesn't feel like you're missing something, It's like when you don't eat breakfast or something. But it doesn't, I don't want to make it so rigid that it's like, but it's nice. And I like it. Maybe because I'm a little bit, maybe I'm over disciplined sometimes. Yeah. But at the same time, you don't want to be like freaking out if you if you're 5 minutes short or whatever.
Seasons.
There's seasons.
Yeah,
there are
seasons, right?
You need more some days, and other days you do less.
Right, I know.
Right.
And sometimes I feel like when you say miss it, what I'm missing, and I think you're probably going to say the same thing. Right. What I feel like I'm missing is I'm missing that touch point with a friend, right? And so a lot of times you said, "Hey, we come back to the States because we don't have that touch point with all our family and etc." And so you have that longing in your heart. It's like it's something we can all identify with. That like, hey, I haven't seen so and so in a while, and I really want to like see them again.
Right.
I have that same feeling when I miss in the morning of like not having that time to spend with the Lord, with Jesus, because He wants to be in a relationship. He wants to be our that not just like rigid. We read this for religiosity, but to read it for relationship.
Right, that's right.
And so that's what I feel like I miss when I miss in the morning, or if I have to cut it short.
That's right.
Like I'm cutting it short with a friend.
That's right. Yeah.
But
so, and then there are times where you have more time. You can, or maybe weekends, you can even read more, study more, pray more. Yeah. So it just depends on certain days too. Yeah. And but you're right, something like that. Yeah.
So we're kind of coming to the end. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of, if you were talking to your friends and somebody's asking you about the mission field, and maybe they don't know whether it's a short-term mission trip looks like for them, or maybe it's a long-term mission trip. And frankly, if you want to throw something in for the people who aren't doing missions, and that's okay because God's called them into a different circle, I'm okay. What do you say to folks when they ask you a little bit about that kind of stuff. Maybe they don't. They say, "Hey, I want to be
Hmm.
like mission sounds interesting, but I don't feel called that way."
Yeah.
Like, how do you respond to that kind of stuff? And what advice do you give those folks?
Yeah, I think God leads us and directs us. He's given us everybody a spiritual gift, and He's put us in a specific place. So wherever you are, that's you can be your ministry. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean you have to go overseas, and we need prayer warriors that are back in the states praying.
Yes, we do.
We need people to do service in the local church as well here in the states. So there's just so many things that we can be involved in. We need people to serve their families. There's homemakers, women who
Yeah.
are faithfully serving their husband and their children, and that's
Mm-hmm.
beautiful to God.
Yeah.
So we should not think that that's less of a ministry than what I'm doing or what anyone
No.
else is doing. Or even so, it's like we all have to. We need to be faithful for what God has given us. That walk, whatever that
Yeah.
walk is, we're to be faithful in our walk with the
Yeah.
Lord.
We should be doing everything that we do as if under the Lord,
That's right.
because
Yeah.
it is under the Lord. It
So
isn't a
so
man.
because if everybody were to go to the foreign mission field, there'd be nobody here in the States.
Amen.
So we need people here to do and be faithful to their
I
families and
agree.
do whatever their
I
jobs.
appreciate you taking the
Thank you.
opportunity to speak. I do realize I caught you out of the blue. We didn't know each other before Sunday,
That's right.
but I appreciate you being willing to come and be on the podcast. I'm looking forward to listen to this come out. And one of the things you'll find is you'll listen to this, back to this. Maybe you won't, but I
Okay.
do often, and
Eric.
I find that the Lord just speaks to my heart again,
Oh,
and
okay.
so
That's
it's kind of fun to come back and listen to it. If you're listening still with us, we greatly appreciate you being here. This is what we're going to mix in is times of a few guests here and there, to have these conversations of faith, to understand the practical application of stepping out into an area where God's calling us. And so hopefully you got a lot from that today. And don't worry, it won't always be us and me and a guest or whatever. It'll be still me and Chris, but we will definitely take opportunities as we can to seize them
Okay.
and tell people
Amen.
about what we're doing. So
Thank
thanks for
you.
being here.
Thank you, everybody.